The autumn air in New York's Greenwood Cemetery was filled with a refreshing chill, stirring the golden-brown leaves that lay scattered across the stone pathways. Alexander Carter emerged from his polished black Cadillac, deftly adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. He was a figure of affluence and influence, the head of a multi-billion-dollar tech empire. Yet as he strolled through the cemetery, surrounded by ancient gravestones, he sensed none of the dominance that characterized his life in the business realm. Today marked the 5th anniversary of his wife Evelyn's passing, and each year he undertook this solitary journey to pay tribute to the woman he had cherished above all else. There were no board meetings, no mergers, no deadlines. Only silence and an all-consuming grief that lingered endlessly. As he neared her resting place, the sound of his polished shoes crunching on the gravel filled the air, and he observed something out of the ordinary. A young boy perched next to Evelyn's headstone, his small arms hugging his knees tightly. He appeared to be no older than 6 or 7, clad in a worn, thin jacket that offered little protection against the chill. His tousled brown hair framed a face that was pale and innocent, reflecting an expression steeped in deep sorrow. Alexander's brows knitted together in a deep expression of concern. Strangers seldom ventured close to his wife's grave. He had ensured it was so. Who was this boy, and what made him seem so at home in that place? With a deliberate clearing of his throat, Alexander began to speak, his voice imbued with both curiosity and a commanding presence. "Hello there, young one. Do you feel disoriented?" The boy gazed upward, his big, tear-laden eyes meeting Alexander's with a fervor that caused him to hesitate. Those eyes held a peculiar familiarity, evoking an unsettling sensation that slithered up his spine. The young lad gently moved his head from side to side. "No," he murmured. "I visited my mother." For a brief instant, Alexander questioned whether he had truly heard correctly. His heart raced within his ribcage, and a chilling, unsettling feeling took root in his chest. "What are you?" he inquired, his voice wavering. The young lad paused, his finger hovering over the name etched into the cold marble of the headstone. Evelyn Carter. The world appeared to shift on its axis. Alexander's breath caught in his throat, his thoughts swirling in a frantic effort to comprehend the shocking revelation he had just encountered. To his knowledge, his wife had never experienced pregnancy. They had discussed the idea of starting a family, yet circumstances had intervened. The extended hours, the pressure, the unspoken sacrifices they had both endured. And then, just as they were on the brink of making it a reality, she was gone, swept away in a tragic accident that left Alexander utterly broken. Yet here stood a young one asserting their identity as her child. His hands tightened into fists, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. He knelt beside the boy, his typically steady demeanor beginning to fray at the seams. "Could you repeat that?" His voice was softer this time, tinged with a hint of apprehension about the response. The young lad sniffled, dabbing at his nose with the fabric of his sleeve. "She was my mother," he reiterated. "She would come to see me prior to her departure." A shiver coursed through Alexander's spine. His thoughts roared with disbelief at the impossibility of the situation. If Evelyn had a child prior to their meeting, wouldn't she have mentioned it to him? And if she had brought this boy into the world after their union, why had she remained silent all this time? He observed the child with greater attention. The likeness was unmistakable. Those gentle brown eyes and the refined features that echoed Evelyn's. It felt like he was gazing upon a fragment of her essence that had lingered in this realm, concealed from his sight until this very moment. With a deep breath, he steeled himself, determined to maintain his composure. "What's your name, kid?" he inquired. "Liam," the young lad replied in a gentle tone. The name held no significance for Alexander. His thoughts swirled with a tempest of feelings: shock, confusion, and an all-consuming sense of betrayal. If the child spoke honestly, it suggested that Evelyn had concealed a life-changing secret from him. But what is the reason? And in what way? She was the sole individual he had entrusted with his innermost self, the only one who had ever glimpsed the man hidden beneath the refined facade of wealth. She must have had a compelling reason to conceal something like this. Alexander let out a sharp breath, his fingers raking through his dark hair. "Where is your residence, Liam?" The boy paused once more, his fingers gliding along the surface of Evelyn's tombstone. At the shelter, he ultimately confessed. "Within the vibrant streets of Brooklyn. They look after me there." Alexander sensed a constriction in his chest. A young one, the child of Evelyn, residing in a shelter? The mere idea twisted his stomach in knots. What could have led to this situation? What kept him away from his family? Where could his father be? A sudden realization struck him with the force of a freight train. "Who informed you that Evelyn was your mother?" Liam looked up, his face a canvas of purity and sorrow. "Ms. Joan at the shelter. She mentioned that my mother abandoned me there when I was just an infant. She had love for me, yet found it impossible to hold on. She would come by occasionally, but then she ceased her visits. Miss Joan claimed she visited heaven." His soft voice quivered on the final word, and Alexander sensed a fracture within himself. Evelyn had been spending time with this boy? He had dedicated years to mourning her absence, convinced he had uncovered every detail of her life. And yet, there existed a whole chapter of her life that he had never even imagined. A hidden offspring, left behind at a refuge. Excuse me? What could have been so dreadful, so unthinkable, that she felt compelled to hide it from him? His thoughts surged with inquiries, yet immediate solutions eluded him. Just the chill of the wind, the fragrance of fall, and the small figure of a boy beside his wife's resting place. His son, if Liam's words held any truth. Alexander pressed his fingers to his temples, a strange wave of helplessness enveloping him. This was beyond his grasp, impervious to wealth or influence. This was not a transaction he could haggle over or an emergency he could pass off to his team. This held deep significance. This was Evelyn. Amidst the chaos, there was a little boy, blissfully unaware of the profound impact he had just had on Alexander's life. After years of certainty, Alexander found himself at a loss, unsure of his next move. However, it was clear that he couldn't simply turn his back and leave. Alexander remained motionless, his breath creating delicate wisps of mist in the frigid New York atmosphere. The young boy standing by his wife's grave, this child named Liam, had just broken apart all the beliefs he held about Evelyn. His intellect battled against the notion, yet the feelings within him whispered an entirely different narrative. He had constructed his existence on reason, planning, and deliberate choices. Yet here he stood, gazing into the tear-filled eyes of a child who strikingly resembled the woman he had cherished. Every part of him yearned to reject it, to turn away and assure himself that this was merely an error, yet he found himself unable to do so. There was something in Liam's expression, in the way he grasped the gravestone as if it were his final link to a mother he scarcely remembered, that held Alexander firmly in the present. He took a deep breath and compelled himself to utter the words. "Who else is aware of this?" he inquired, his voice now softer and more deliberate. Liam gazed downward, his foot nudging the scattered leaves that lay beside the headstone. He softly expressed his longing for Joan. "She revealed it to me when I had reached an age of comprehension. She mentioned that my mother cared for me but was unable to provide the care I needed. She would occasionally visit, but then she ceased to do so." The young lad paused, gathering his courage before raising his gaze once more. "Did she cease her actions due to your influence?" The question struck Alexander with the force of a gut punch. He took a step back, momentarily taken aback by the unfiltered purity in Liam's voice. His heart raced as the weight of the implication dawned on him. Had Evelyn concealed this child from him due to her feelings of guilt? Did she worry about how he would respond? He had always been kind, yet he was acutely aware of his own nature. He was a man who cherished order, who demanded transparency, who struggled to navigate unforeseen turmoil. Had she feared that revealing the truth would shatter their bond? He lowered himself, aligning his eyes with Liam's. "I had no idea about you," he remarked, his tone tinged with both regret and disbelief. "Had I possessed that, the outcome would have been altered." Yet, as he uttered those words, a doubt crept into his mind about their truthfulness. Would he have embraced this? Could he have embraced another man's child and nurtured him as if he were his own? His fingers clenched tightly, a fire of frustration igniting within him. He sought clarity, genuine responses. There was but a singular point to begin. He straightened up, retrieved his phone, and began scrolling through his contacts until he located the number for his private investigator, Daniel Reeves. "I need you to investigate something for me," he stated as soon as the call was established. "A young boy named Liam residing in a shelter in Brooklyn. Discover all the details about his journey, identify his biological father, and investigate any records linking him to Evelyn." He terminated the call just as Daniel was about to pose any inquiries. At this moment, he lacked the tolerance for any sort of elaboration. He glanced back at Liam, who observed him with a mix of caution and intrigue. "Join me," Alexander said, extending his hand. The young lad paused, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "Where is it?" "Place bathed in warmth. It's unwise to be out here in this chill." Liam cast a final look at the headstone before intertwining his small hand with Alexander's. A seemingly small act, yet it unleashed a torrent of feelings within him. He guided the boy to his car, secured him in the passenger seat, and began the drive toward Brooklyn, his thoughts swirling with a mix of emotions. The streets of New York flowed past like a dream, their vibrant pulse muted by the gravity of the occasion. Upon arriving at the shelter, a humble brick structure nestled between two imposing apartment buildings, Alexander parked the car and exited. Liam trailed behind, his hands buried deep in his jacket pockets as they stepped inside. The scent of disinfectant mingled with the mustiness of old books, while a weary woman in her 60s tended to the front desk. She carefully repositioned her glasses upon catching sight of Liam. "Back already, darling?" she said with warmth, but then her eyes moved to Alexander, her demeanor shifting to one of caution. "Who might you be?" "Alexander Carter," he stated, retrieving his wallet and sliding a business card across the counter. "I would like to have a conversation with Miss Joan." The woman paused briefly, then nodded and slipped away down the hallway. Moments later, a small, silver-haired lady appeared. She glanced at Liam first, offering him a warm smile, then shifted her gaze to Alexander, her piercing blue eyes assessing him intently. "Mr. Carter," she said, her tone enigmatic. "I had been curious about when you would arrive." Her words reverberated within him, stirring a profound reaction. "Did you recognize me?" he inquired, his tone laced with doubt. Miss Joan nodded, her hands neatly folded before her. "Evelyn shared some insights about you," she confessed. "She compelled me to vow that I would never make contact, never reveal this to you. Her desire was to safeguard you both. Shield me from what?" he insisted, his tolerance dwindling. "From the reality." The elderly woman let out a weary sigh. From the anguish, she found clarity. "Evelyn held deep feelings for you, Mr. Carter, yet she was haunted by a past that she could never truly leave behind. Upon meeting you, she had already faced the most challenging choice of her life, letting go of Liam so he could pursue a brighter future. She had the desire to share her thoughts, but by the moment she found the strength, she had already left." Alexander sensed a knot forming in his stomach. He had devoted years to mourning Evelyn's absence, convinced that he understood her more deeply than anyone else. And yet, a portion of her existence had stayed concealed from him. He glanced at Liam, who was fixated on the ground. His slight frame curled inward as if preparing for disappointment. His heart tightened at the sight. He found himself grappling with a whirlwind of emotions. Should he be angry at Evelyn for her secrecy, mournful for the boy who had lived without a mother, or burdened by guilt for his ignorance until now? With a steadying inhale, he turned to confront Miss Joan once more. What is his fate now? She regarded him with a calculated gaze. Ultimately, the decision lies with you, Mr. Carter. He is without family. There are no legal guardians. He has been here since his infancy. Leaving without action leads to no transformation. He lingers here, hoping for a place to call his own that might never arrive. Ultimately, the choice to engage in his life is yours to make. Alexander sensed the gravity of the choice pressing down on him. He entered the cemetery today with the intention of laying down flowers and mourning quietly. Instead, he had stepped away with a child who could potentially be his burden. A child deeply intertwined with the woman he cherished above all else. He cast his gaze upon Liam, who continued to avoid his eyes. Gingerly, he extended his hand and rested it on the boy's delicate shoulder. "Come on, kid," he murmured softly. "It's time to leave this place." Liam finally lifted his gaze, his eyes filled with astonishment, followed by a flicker of cautious optimism. Silently, he trailed behind Alexander as they exited through the door. The billionaire CEO had dedicated years to constructing an empire, meticulously managing every facet of his existence with exactitude. As he exited the shelter with Liam beside him, he understood that, after years, he was finally venturing into the unknown. Before moving on, please subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. Alexander navigated the vibrant streets of New York, the burden of the night's discoveries weighing down on him. The vibrant glow of the city and its unending hustle seemed almost dreamlike, as though he had stepped into a narrative not his own. He cast a quick look at Liam, who remained still in the passenger seat, his small hands clutching the edges of his oversized jacket. The young lad gazed through the window, his expression a blend of weariness and doubt. Alexander found himself at a loss for words in front of him. How could he possibly provide solace to a child he had only just encountered, particularly when that child's mere presence had completely shattered his understanding of the world? His hold on the steering wheel became firmer as he breathed out steadily, compelling himself to concentrate on the next steps that lay ahead. As he drove into the underground parking of his Upper East Side penthouse, he switched off the engine and glanced over at Liam. "Come on," he said, his voice gentler than usual. The boy paused briefly, then nodded and stepped into the private elevator behind him. With the doors shutting, an oppressive silence enveloped them. Alexander had always found solace in silence, navigating negotiations, business meetings, and boardrooms brimming with high-stakes decisions. Yet this situation felt distinctly different. This was not a matter of stocks or mergers. This story revolves around a boy who experienced loss before he could truly grasp the meaning of family. As they entered the penthouse, Liam's eyes grew wide, absorbing the soaring ceilings, the expansive windows that framed a stunning vista of Manhattan, and the elegant, minimalist furnishings that adorned the spacious area. The home was crafted for a man who embraced efficiency, rather than for a child. Alexander abruptly understood how frigid and detached it might appear to Liam. There were no toys, no traces of warmth, no indication that a family had ever called this place home, as it has never occurred. With a deliberate clearing of his throat, Alexander placed his keys on the polished marble counter. "Are you feeling hungry?" Liam paused for a moment before giving a slight nod. "Indeed, just a bit." Alexander found himself uncertain about the dietary preferences of children. Did he really have anything in his fridge that wasn't pricey wine or ready-made gourmet dishes? He opened the fridge, his eyes gliding over the meticulously arranged shelves before choosing something uncomplicated. "What do you think about grilled cheese?" he suggested. Liam's face lit up ever so slightly. Understood. The slightest detail, yet the warmth in the boy's voice caused a gentle release within Alexander's chest. He may not excel in this area, but he could certainly whip up a sandwich. While he toiled in the kitchen, the enticing sizzle of butter in the pan permeated the air. Liam meandered into the living room, his tiny hands gliding over the smooth edges of the bookshelves. He paused before a framed photograph on the mantel, capturing a moment of Evelyn. His fingers lingered just above the glass, hesitant to make contact. "She was truly beautiful," he whispered. Alexander gulped nervously. He approached, taking his place next to Liam as they both gazed at the photograph of the woman they had both cherished. "Indeed," he murmured softly. "She existed." The boy then turned to him, his gaze probing his face. "Did you truly care for her?" The inquiry struck Alexander unexpectedly. It was a seemingly straightforward word, yet it held immense significance. He had poured all his love into Evelyn, yet now he understood that there was so much about her that remained a mystery to him. Did that imply his affection had been lacking? He let out a slow breath. Indeed, he confessed. Quite a bit. Liam nodded, a subtle acknowledgement flickering within him, as if that answer resonated with a profound part of his being. He whispered that Miss Jones had said she loved him too. Yet, she was unable to hold on to me. His voice trembled just a bit, and Alexander sensed a constriction in his throat. This child had devoted his entire existence to pondering the reasons behind his mother's absence. Now, in the unfamiliar surroundings of a stranger's home, he likely found himself questioning whether he was on the verge of being abandoned once more. Alexander had always lacked a nurturing disposition. He constructed barriers around his being, favoring reason and order above feelings. But gazing at Liam now, he realized one undeniable truth. He couldn't just turn his back and leave. Uncertain of what lay ahead, he resolved not to allow the boy to confront it by himself. After dinner, Liam nestled into the expansive leather couch, his petite figure almost engulfed by the soft cushions. Alexander reclined in the armchair opposite him, savoring a glass of scotch, deep in contemplation. He had already directed Daniel to delve further into Evelyn's history, to uncover all there was to know about Liam's father, whether he was still living, and if he represented any sort of danger. Yet, a part of him was already aware of what the investigator would uncover. Liam found himself utterly alone. Only him. The weight of that realization pressed down on his chest. As time went on, Liam's blinks became more languid, his head tilting forward gently before he startled himself back to alertness. Alexander observed him, weighing the decision of directing him to one of the guest rooms or allowing him to rest in his current spot. Just as he was about to make a choice, Liam's voice shattered the stillness. "Will you be sending me back?" The inquiry was so hushed, so laden with doubt, that Alexander experienced it as a blade piercing his core. He placed his glass on the table and leaned in, elbows propped on his knees. "Would you like to return?" Liam swiftly shook his head. "Absolutely not. I have no other options." Alexander brushed his fingers through his hair, letting out a slow breath. He was unprepared for this moment. He lacked the tools to be a protector, much less a parent. Yet this child had endured more than their fair share of loss. "Then you stay," he declared with conviction. Liam's eyes widened, revealing a hint of surprise at the unexpected response. "Is that so?" Alexander gave a slight nod. "Indeed. We'll find a way." Liam remained silent, yet the subtle easing of his small shoulders and the gradual release of his grip on the blanket conveyed to Alexander all he needed to understand. Moments later, Liam drifted into a deep slumber, his breaths gentle and rhythmic. Alexander reclined, gazing out at the sprawling city skyline beyond the window. His existence had consistently been carefully orchestrated, each step deliberately considered. In just one night, everything transformed. He entered the cemetery with the intention of mourning alone, yet emerged with a child who could potentially change the trajectory of his existence. He felt uncertain about what would unfold next. Yet, after a long stretch of time, he experienced a sensation beyond mere void. Alexander stirred awake to the subtle rustle echoing through his penthouse. For a brief moment, he reclined in bed, gazing at the ceiling, attempting to reconstruct the occurrences of the night before. The truth dawned on him swiftly. Liam was present. He had company now. He tossed aside the covers and rubbed his face, attempting to dispel the weariness that clung to him. His life had always been filled with chaos, yet this particular clamor, the intrusion of another soul into his realm, was a wholly unfamiliar experience. Upon entering the living room, he discovered Liam positioned by the expansive glass windows, gazing intently at the city skyline. The boy remained cocooned in the blanket from the previous night, his petite figure appearing even more diminutive against the imposing silhouettes of the buildings, and the dawn sky brushed with gentle shades of orange and pink. Liam pivoted at the sound of Alexander's footsteps, his gaze betraying a hint of doubt. He spoke softly, unsure whether to disturb your slumber. Alexander gestured with a flick of his wrist, brushing off the matter. "You're doing well." He cast a quick look at the clock. 6:30 a.m. It was far too early for someone like him, who had long since forsaken the dawn in favor of late-night gatherings and even later hours consumed by his craft. Yet, there was an unmistakable quality to this morning that set it apart. There was no pressing engagement to hurry to, no critical calls vying for his focus. A young boy in his penthouse, appearing uncertain of his place in such a grand setting. "Are you feeling hungry?" Alexander inquired as he made his way to the kitchen. Liam paused for a moment before giving a nod. Indeed, Alexander didn't consider himself a culinary expert, yet he believed that breakfast ought to be straightforward. He discovered a few eggs nestled in the fridge and broke them into a pan, the sizzling sound breaking the quietude that enveloped them. "Have you ever attended school?" he inquired, maintaining a relaxed tone. Liam fidgeted in his seat at the counter, toying with the edge of the blanket. "A small amount. Miss Joan attempted to educate me at home, but she was overwhelmed with the number of children she had to manage." Alexander nodded, his expression revealing no surprise. The foster system was under immense strain, and children like Liam frequently slipped through the gaps. He was uncertain about the decision to enroll Liam in a school at this point. His existence was far from ordinary, and he felt completely unprepared to provide the boy with that sense of security. Yet, he understood one truth. The kid was worthy of a genuine opportunity for something greater. While they dined, Liam maintained a silence that was contemplative rather than completely distant. He observed Alexander intently, as though he were still attempting to unravel the mystery of his character. Alexander felt uncertain about the boy's perception of him. An unfamiliar face? A glimmer of hope? Is someone just passing through? The notion of holding a lasting place in someone's life made him uneasy. He had always struggled with relationships, with commitment, with anything that demanded emotional openness. As he observed Liam maneuvering his scrambled eggs across the plate, he realized he had already forged a quiet promise, one from which he could not retreat. The remainder of the morning slipped by in a haze. Alexander reached out to Daniel, directing him to compile all available information regarding Liam's history. His birth certificate, any medical records, anything that could shed light on what had transpired with this child before he arrived at Evelyn's grave. The greater his knowledge, the more equipped he would become. Yet, the query that remained unanswered was what he planned to do with that knowledge. Was he considering adopting Liam? Assume the role of his legal guardian? Or was he merely holding him here until a more suitable solution came to mind? He lacked the solutions. For an individual who had constructed his existence around the certainty of the next step, that was deeply disconcerting. By noon, he had reached yet another conclusion. Liam found himself in need of a fresh wardrobe. The large jacket draped over him, a remnant from the cemetery, was unmistakably not his own, and every aspect of his look resonated with a sense of disregard. Alexander felt uncertain about the process of shopping for a child, yet he was aware of someone with the expertise to guide him. Following a brief phone conversation, he settled into the back seat of his car with Liam next to him, heading towards Fifth Avenue, where his assistant, Rebecca, awaited their arrival. She was adept, incisive, and the sole individual capable of managing Alexander's erratic requests seamlessly. After years of working for him, she couldn't hide her surprise when she saw him emerge from the car, a child accompanying him. "You didn't mention you had a child," she remarked, arching an eyebrow. Alexander cast her a glance. "I do not." Liam lingered nearby, visibly uncertain about Rebecca's presence. Her expression gentled as she gazed at him, her body lowering slightly. "Hello, my name is Rebecca. May I ask for your name?" Liam paused, contemplating his response. "Liam." Her lips curled into a smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Liam. How about we find you some stylish outfits, shall we?" The shopping excursion unfolded more seamlessly than Alexander had anticipated, largely due to Rebecca's decisive leadership. She possessed a keen sense of detail and had a remarkable ability to put Liam at ease. He observed as Liam gradually began to unwind, selecting things he appreciated and even smiling occasionally. It was peculiar witnessing the boy awaken in a manner that had been absent the previous night. Once they finished, Liam found himself with a fresh wardrobe, while Alexander began to sense an unsettling shift towards what seemed like responsibility. That evening, after the meal, Liam settled onto the couch, perusing a book that Rebecca had gifted him, his feet tucked comfortably beneath him. Alexander sat opposite him, a glass of whiskey cradled in his hand, observing the city lights dance outside. "Have you ever felt fear?" Liam inquired abruptly, his gaze fixed on the pages of his book. The inquiry took Alexander by surprise. He was a man who had endured fierce boardroom conflicts, financial downturns, and profound personal setbacks. He never voiced his fear, keeping it buried deep within. At times, he confessed after a lengthy silence. Liam nodded, conveying an air of comprehension. Same here. Alexander found himself puzzled by the impact of that admission on him. Perhaps it was because Liam had every reason to feel fear. He had lost his mother, had no father, and was now residing with an unfamiliar person in a world that felt utterly foreign to him. And yet he found himself here, adjusting, enduring. In that serene strength, Alexander found an unexpected resonance that captivated him. As the evening progressed, Liam's eyelids became increasingly heavy, his head gradually sinking against the soft couch cushion. Alexander observed him for a brief moment before rising and retrieving the blanket from the far end of the couch, gently covering the boy with it. He was uncertain about what lay ahead, yet he was certain of one thing. Liam remained firmly in place, regarding self-discipline, mastery, and strategic risks. However, his present circumstances did not align with any of those principles. A week had gone by since he discovered Liam at Evelyn's grave, and every day had brought its own challenges. The boy had grown more subdued, as though he were acclimating to his new circumstances, yet a lingering doubt remained about its permanence. Alexander was also wrestling with the transformations. His penthouse, formerly a sanctuary of tranquility and productivity, now bore subtle yet unmistakable traces of a child's influence. A solitary plate at breakfast, novels scattered across the coffee table, and the soft murmur of a television broadcasting cartoons in the early hours. He found himself in a haze of uncertainty regarding his emotions about the entire situation. That morning, Alexander occupied his office at Manhattan Towers, gazing at the financial reports spread before him, yet his thoughts drifted to distant realms. Daniel had compiled additional information regarding Liam's history, and the file now rested before him, poised to be explored. He inhaled deeply before turning the pages with anticipation. The initial object that caught his eye was the birth certificate of Liam. His mother's name, Evelyn Carter, appeared on the list. The name of the father, however, remained unfilled. Alexander had anticipated this outcome, yet witnessing it laid out so plainly disturbed him more than he had expected. He flipped the page, perusing the case reports from child services. Liam moved through various foster homes following the loss of Evelyn. The reports highlighted instances of neglect, unstable surroundings, and the boy's repeated attempts to escape. His most recent placement was with a woman named Joan Mitchell, who operated a crowded foster home in Brooklyn. However, the file contained no information that clarified Liam's presence at Evelyn's grave that night. No reference was made to any legal guardian accompanying him, nor was there any sign that anyone had been searching for him. Alexander shut the file and let out a deep breath. As he delved deeper into Liam's history, it became increasingly evident that this boy had endured solitude for an extended period. The idea stirred a sense of unease within him. He had never viewed himself as the nurturing kind, never envisioned bearing the weight of someone else's existence. Yet with Liam's presence, Alexander found it increasingly difficult to dismiss the mounting sense of duty that was eating away at him. That evening, Alexander returned home sooner than he typically did. Liam was discovered in the living room, seated on the floor, surrounded by his new books. The scene was nearly dreamlike. He had encountered children in fleeting moments before, attended charity events at the residences of business colleagues, but never like this, never woven into the fabric of his own existence. "How did your day unfold?" Alexander inquired, loosening his tie as he entered the room. Liam glanced upward, an expression of surprise crossing his face at the question posed. "Good," he replied with a hint of uncertainty. Alexander acknowledged with a nod and settled onto the couch. "What book has captured your attention?" Liam paused momentarily, contemplating as he lifted one of the books. It was a compilation of timeless tales, a selection that Rebecca had chosen for him. "Are you fond of them?" Alexander inquired. Liam gave a nonchalant shrug. "I suppose. Some evoke a sense of melancholy." Alexander reclined, contemplating that thought. He had always been captivated by narratives, not for their storylines but for the insights they offered into human nature. Each narrative contained a moral, an unspoken reality concealed within its phrases. He expressed that tales of sorrow hold significant value. They impart knowledge that we might not acquire through other means. Liam nodded, looking thoughtful. "Did you ever read sad stories when you were a kid?" The question caught Alexander off guard. He had read, of course, but nothing like what Liam was reading. His childhood had been shaped by business magazines and financial reports long before he had any real use for them. "Not really," he admitted. Liam didn't push for more. Instead, he set the book aside and picked up another, flipping through the pages absent-mindedly. For a while, neither of them spoke. The quiet was comfortable, almost natural. Alexander found himself studying the boy, noting the way he had already started to look healthier with regular meals and sleep. He still had the cautious air of someone who wasn't used to trusting easily. But there were moments, like now, when he seemed to let his guard down just a little. "I found some information about your past today," Alexander finally said. Liam tensed slightly, his fingers gripping the edges of the book. "Oh," Alexander hesitated before continuing. "Your mother never listed a father on your birth certificate." He watched Liam's reaction carefully. The boy swallowed hard but said nothing. Alexander waited, giving him time to process. Finally, Liam spoke, his voice quiet. "She never talked about him." Alexander nodded, expecting that answer. "Do you ever think about looking for him?" Liam shook his head quickly. "No. If he wanted me, he would have been here, right?" The simplicity of the statement hit Alexander harder than he expected. He wasn't sure what to say to that, so he simply nodded. Liam's logic was heartbreaking in its honesty. Later that night, after Liam had gone to bed, Alexander stood by the window, staring out at the city below. His mind was restless. He had spent his entire life making decisions based on logic and profit, weighing risks against rewards. But this wasn't business. This was something else entirely. He could walk away, find a better home for Liam, let someone else take responsibility. But the thought of sending Liam away left a bitter taste in his mouth. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. Was Daniel. "I found something else," Daniel said without preamble. There was a record sealed in one of the older databases. Evelyn Carter filed a request for paternity testing when Liam was an infant. The request was never followed up on, but the name she listed as the potential father. Daniel hesitated. It was Mark Donovan. Alexander froze. The name was one he recognized instantly. Mark Donovan was a name whispered in boardrooms and splashed across business headlines. A billionaire investor, ruthless in his dealings. A man known for his cutthroat strategies and his ability to destroy companies overnight. Alexander had worked with him before, had even considered him a rival in certain circles. The idea that Liam could be his son was almost unbelievable. But if it was true, "Are you sure?" Alexander asked. 100%, Daniel replied. "The records are there." Evelyn likely had her suspicions, yet she never had the opportunity to validate them through legal means. Alexander exhaled deeply, his thoughts swirling rapidly. If Mark Donovan were Liam's father, it would alter the entire landscape of their lives. Alexander was certain that if Donovan discovered the truth, he would not react kindly. The man wielded his power with an iron grip, his controlling nature evident in every interaction. If he desired Liam, he would claim him, regardless of Liam's feelings on the matter. Alexander's fingers clenched around his phone. He had devoted years to navigating the intricate dynamics of the business realm, yet this situation felt entirely distinct. This transcended mere financial transactions or agreements. This tale revolves around a young soul who had endured more loss than anyone should bear. And Alexander was determined not to allow someone like Mark Donovan to disrupt the fragile stability that Liam had only just begun to establish. Before we proceed, kindly subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. Alexander hardly found rest that night. The discovery that Mark Donovan could potentially be Liam's father had sent his thoughts whirling in unexpected directions. He had encountered merciless entrepreneurs in the past, individuals who would stop at nothing to achieve their desires. Yet, this transcended a mere transaction. It was about the life of a child. He was determined not to allow Mark Donovan to come in and seize control simply because he had the authority to do so. With the dawn's light, Alexander had reached his conclusion. He had to verify the reality, but above all, he had to determine his course of action if Mark truly turned out to be Liam's father. He couldn't afford to let the boy be swept away into yet another tempest of doubt. During breakfast, Liam remained silent at the table, idly prodding his eggs with his fork. He had grown increasingly reserved since their discussion the previous night, his familiar, cautious demeanor returning once more. Alexander observed him, a peculiar sense of protectiveness swelling within him. "What are your thoughts on going to the park today?" he inquired. Liam looked up, a frown forming on his face. "What about the park?" Alexander gave a slight nod. "Heart of the city. I thought it would be nice for us to step out for a bit." Liam paused for a moment, then offered a slight shrug. "Very well, I suppose. It wasn't excitement, but it was certainly something." They reached Central Park later that morning, the autumn air refreshing yet pleasantly mild. The park buzzed with energy as joggers weaved through the paths, families enjoyed their time together, and street musicians filled the atmosphere with enchanting melodies. Liam strolled alongside Alexander, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his jacket, his gaze flitting about as though he were still uncertain of his place in this setting. Alexander recognized that expression, one he had encountered previously in business associates who seemed uncomfortable in his realm. Yet with Liam it felt distinct. It wasn't merely uncertainty. It was a profound conviction that he was perpetually on the brink of being abandoned once more. Eventually, they discovered a bench by a pond, where Liam settled in, observing a cluster of children as they tossed crumbs to the ducks. Alexander took a seat next to him, feeling uncertain about how to initiate the important conversation that loomed ahead. "You mentioned that your mother never spoke of your father," he began. Liam stiffened yet gave a slight nod. What if she embarked on a quest to seek him out? Liam glanced at him, his eyes filled with caution. "Could you clarify what you mean?" Alexander selected his words with great precision. What if she questioned his identity and sought to verify it? Liam furrowed his brow, contemplating the notion. "I'm not sure," he confessed. She remained silent. She simply put in a great deal of effort. She refrained from discussing matters of that nature. He averted his gaze, his voice barely above a whisper. It seems she harbored a fear of something. Alexander experienced a well-known discomfort take root in his chest. If Evelyn had felt fear, it was not without justification. And if Mark Donovan were indeed the father, that apprehension could have been warranted. "If you had the opportunity to know for certain, would you want to?" he inquired. Liam paused for a moment, then offered a slight shrug. "I'm uncertain. It seems it holds little significance." "He isn't here, is he?" Alexander let out a slow breath. The boy had faced abandonment in countless forms, leading him to abandon hope itself. The moment struck with a heavy heart. "What if he was aware of your existence?" Alexander inquired with caution. "What if he discovered it now?" Liam tensed up. He replied hastily, "I don't want him to either. I'm not concerned about whether he's wealthy or anything like that. He was absent when my mom required support, so what reason do I have to seek him out now?" The certainty in Liam's voice was piercing, and Alexander sensed a weight settle in his chest. The boy was weary of yet another strong figure viewing him as merely a duty. He sought a sense of permanence. He sought a presence that would remain steadfast. And Alexander understood with striking clarity that he had no intention of relinquishing Liam to anyone, not even if Mark Donovan proved to be his biological father. He couldn't pinpoint the moment it occurred, but the thought of releasing Liam felt unsettling in a way that nothing ever had before. That evening, Alexander convened with Daniel in his office, the burden of his choice heavy upon him. "A paternity test is necessary," Alexander stated bluntly. Daniel, always the consummate expert, merely nodded. He assured me that he could handle it with the utmost discretion. However, if Donovan catches wind of it, he will definitely come searching. Alexander tightened his jaw. "We ensure he remains unaware, at least for the time being." Daniel observed him intently for a brief moment. "Seems you've made your choice, haven't you?" he inquired. "Regardless of his role as a father, you won't be letting Liam go." Alexander let out a deep breath, his hand moving to his face in a weary gesture. "The child has endured quite a lot," he confessed. "I refuse to allow a billionaire with a god complex to waltz in and treat him like a mere business acquisition." Daniel wore a sly grin. "That's quite a bold position, especially coming from someone with immense wealth and a sense of superiority." Alexander cast a glance his way, yet Daniel merely laughed. "Very well. I will complete the test discreetly. However, if Donovan is indeed the father, we must devise a strategy. He lacks integrity in his approach." Alexander was already aware of that. He had witnessed firsthand the tactics employed by Mark Donovan, acquiring companies and cornering individuals until they were left with no option but to capitulate. However, Liam was not an organization. He was just a young one, and Alexander refused to allow him to be used as a mere piece in another strategy. 2 days later, Daniel presented him with an envelope filled with the test results. With steady hands, Alexander opened it, feeling his heart race more than he cared to acknowledge. He perused the document swiftly, and upon arriving at the conclusion, he let out a sharp breath. It turned out that Mark Donovan was, in reality, Liam's biological father. Alexander reclined in his chair, allowing the truth to wash over him. He had anticipated it, but witnessing the confirmation rendered it more tangible. Now the dilemma was, how would he utilize this information? He had vowed to himself that he wouldn't allow Liam to be thrown into uncertainty once more. However, concealing this from Mark Donovan would prove to be quite a challenge. The man possessed resources, and should he ever discover the truth, he would assert his rights with unwavering determination. For the moment, Alexander resolved to keep his thoughts to himself. He would shield Liam for as long as possible, ensuring his safety from the impending storm that was bound to arrive. Yet, beneath the surface, he was acutely aware that it was merely a question of time before Mark Donovan uncovered the reality. And when that moment arrived, Alexander would need to prepare for a confrontation unlike any he had faced previously. Before we proceed, kindly subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. Alexander was acutely aware that he was treading a precarious path. Maintaining the confidentiality of the paternity test results was a gamble, yet he couldn't allow Mark Donovan to dictate Liam's future. The boy had faced more than his fair share of turmoil, and Alexander was determined not to allow another formidable figure to regard him as merely a possession to be seized. Yet, the burden of reality bore down on him each day, and he understood it was merely a question of when something would compel him to act. Liam had started to find his footing in his new life, yet he maintained a sense of vigilance. He found the concept of permanence unfamiliar, and Alexander grasped the reason behind it. The boy had faced abandonment in multiple forms, and trust was a concept that eluded him. Yet, there were instances, brief and ephemeral, when Alexander caught sight of the boy Liam might have become had fate been more benevolent to him. It was a moment to remember when they stepped into a bookstore in Midtown, and Liam's eyes sparkled at the towering shelves filled with tales waiting to be discovered. Or when they strolled along the Hudson River, and Liam, for the first time, posed a question to Alexander about his childhood. These moments revealed to Alexander that, against all odds, Liam still harbored a flicker of hope hidden deep within him. One evening, Alexander came home to discover Liam at the dining table, engrossed in an open book before him. The boy was not engaged in reading, however. He gazed at the pages, seemingly adrift in contemplation. "Is there something you're pondering?" Alexander inquired as he placed his briefcase on the ground. Liam paused, contemplating, before finally giving a nod. He confessed softly that he had been reflecting on his mother. Alexander drew out a chair and settled into it, facing him directly. "What is her story?" Liam delicately ran his finger along the spine of the book. "She put in a great deal of effort. I never quite grasped the reason behind her constant fatigue, but now it all makes sense. She was doing her best to ensure our well-being. Yet I believe she felt a sense of sadness as well." Alexander experienced a surge of compassion. Evelyn had given her all, yet she had shouldered weights that no one ought to endure in solitude. "She had deep feelings for you," Alexander remarked. "It is evident." Liam acknowledged with a nod, his gaze fixed elsewhere. "Do you believe she was aware of my father's identity?" The inquiry caused Alexander to hesitate. Liam had never been so straightforward before. With great deliberation, he selected his words. He mentioned that he believed she harbored some doubts. Yet perhaps she questioned whether he would embody the kind of father you truly deserved. Liam lifted his gaze, his eyes keen with realization. "So he's the villain?" Alexander let out a breath. "Not really. However, he possesses great strength. At times, those in positions of power may not always choose wisely regarding family matters." Liam observed him intently for a brief moment. "Are you familiar with his identity?" Alexander felt a constriction in his chest. This was the moment he had feared the most. "Liam, you do?" Liam interjected, his voice scarcely rising above a whisper. "You were aware, yet you chose not to share that with me." Alexander leaned forward, his voice steady yet composed. "My intention was to keep you safe. I had to confirm everything before I spoke up." Liam's hands tightened into fists. "Who is that individual?" Alexander paused, fully aware that deception was not an option. "Mark Donovan." Initially, the name held no significance for Liam. He furrowed his brow, attempting to recall it. Then understanding struck him, and his expression soured. "The wealthy magnate? The one that's always on television." Alexander gave a slight nod. Liam's face contorted in a mix of fury and incredulity. "He was aware of my existence and remained indifferent?" Alexander dismissed the notion with a shake of his head. "He remains unaware at this moment. He was never informed by your mother, and I only discovered it not long ago." Liam rose so suddenly that his chair screeched across the floor. "What comes next? Will you share that with him?" The fury in his voice wasn't solely aimed at Mark Donovan. It was also directed at Alexander. And that stung deeper than he was willing to acknowledge. "Only if you wish for me to," Alexander replied calmly. "This is the story of your life, Liam. Your voice matters in determining the next steps." Liam strode back and forth in the room, his feelings clashing inside him. What if he discovers it regardless? What if he attempts to whisk me away? His voice wavered just a bit, revealing the underlying fear masked by his fury. Alexander rose and gently rested a firm hand on the boy's shoulder. "I refuse to allow that to occur," he declared. "You won't be going anywhere unless you choose to do so." Liam scrutinized his expression, seeking any hint of dishonesty. Discovering nothing, he let out a shaky breath and gave a nod. That night, as Alexander reclined in bed, he sensed a shift in the air. The reality had been unveiled, and there was no turning back. Liam was the son of a formidable man. Eventually, Mark Donovan would uncover the truth. When that day arrived, Alexander would be prepared. He had assured Liam that he would not allow anyone to take him away. He was determined to uphold that promise, regardless of the challenges ahead. Before moving on to the next part, kindly subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. Alexander sensed that the tranquility was fleeting. As Liam uncovered the truth of his father's identity, an unspoken countdown commenced. Mark Donovan was not the kind of man to linger in shadows, and Alexander was well aware that the billionaire would inevitably unearth the reality. The inquiry was, when he acted, what would be his response to it? Liam chose to keep his thoughts to himself for the time being. He found it difficult to come to terms with the reality that his father held such a significant position in New York. Yet, Alexander observed the nuanced shifts in the boy's behavior. He seemed increasingly unsettled, his eyes wandering during their discussions, as though his thoughts were perpetually whirling with unresolved inquiries. And then one evening those questions erupted at last. A gentle knock echoed through Alexander's office door, marking the beginning of an unexpected encounter. He glanced away from the mountain of reports he had been poring over and noticed Liam lingering there, his hands tucked into the pockets of his hoodie. "May I pose a question to you?" The boy spoke with uncertainty. Alexander set his pen aside. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Liam stepped inside, hesitating at the doorway as if uncertain about voicing his thoughts. After a moment's pause and a deep breath, he asked, "Do you think he would have wanted me?" The question struck Alexander more profoundly than he anticipated. He had anticipated this naturally. Yet, the realization that Liam had been harboring this thought within him still struck a chord of sadness. "Liam," Alexander spoke softly, "there are times when people fail to recognize the value of what they possess until it slips away. Your mother decided to keep you away from him. That doesn't imply you weren't wanted. It simply means she was attempting to shield you." Liam released a laugh devoid of humor. "So she believed he posed a threat?" "Not a threat," Alexander amended. "But he's a man who values power above connections. And your mother, she understood you were worthy of more than that." Liam nodded slowly, yet a shadow of concern lingered in his expression. "If he discovers the truth, will he desire me then?" Alexander let out a heavy sigh, massaging his temples. "I can't say for certain, Liam. However, I am certain of this: you are not merely a business asset. You are not a pawn in another's empire. You are an individual, and only you have the authority to determine your own value." The boy contemplated those words thoughtfully before finally responding, "I don't know if I even want to." Alexander gave a gentle, reassuring smile. "Then you don't have to. That's your choice." However, the following day, everything took a turn. Alexander found himself in a meeting when his assistant burst in, her expression ashen with urgency. "Sir," she gasped, "a visitor has arrived to speak with you. He insists it's urgent." Alexander's brow furrowed, already anticipating complications. "Who is it?" "Mark Donovan." The name sent a chilling jolt through Alexander's veins. He steeled himself, striving to maintain his composure as he rose to his feet. "Where is he?" "In the lobby." Alexander adjusted his suit and descended the stairs, bracing himself for the impending storm. As he entered the lobby, he immediately caught sight of Mark Donovan. The billionaire radiated authority. His impeccably tailored suit was striking, and his stance conveyed dominance and assurance. The moment Alexander drew near, his piercing blue gaze fixed intently on him. "Mark," Alexander said with a polished tone, "we need to talk." He motioned toward a secluded conference room, guiding the billionaire within. The instant the door clicked closed, Mark sprang into action. "I trust you understand the purpose of my visit." Alexander held his gaze steady. Mark folded his arms, a hint of frustration in his voice. "I can guess. I don't like being kept in the dark, particularly regarding something of such importance." "And what do you define as important?" Alexander inquired cautiously. Mark's demeanor grew stern. "A young one. My young one." The silence lingered, heavy with unspoken words. Alexander had anticipated this confrontation, but now that it was unfolding, he recognized the depth of his disdain for the notion of Mark Donovan laying any sort of claim over Liam. "What do you want, Mark?" he finally asked. "What do you think?" Mark leaned in slightly. "I wish to see my son." Alexander's jaw clenched. "He is not merely a prize to be claimed now that you are aware of his existence." Mark's eyes glinted with annoyance. "I never claimed he was. But you don't have the right to decide this for him either." Alexander let out a slow breath, striving to maintain his composure. "He's uncertain about the desire to meet you. I assured him that he would have a say in this matter, and I am determined to uphold that assurance." Mark regarded him intently for a prolonged moment before giving a subtle nod. "Very well. I won't impose anything. However, I feel compelled to send him a message. Alexander paused for a moment before conceding. I will pass it along to him. But there's no need for pressure or manipulation. If he doesn't want to reach out, then just step back. Mark smirked. We'll see. Later that evening, Alexander sat with Liam at the dinner table, the gravity of the impending moment pressing down on him. He retrieved the sealed envelope and placed it on the table. It's from Mark. Liam gazed at it, tension coiling around him like a tightly wound spring. What does it say? I have no idea, Alexander confessed. I informed him that I would leave it up to you to determine whether he wished to read it. Liam paused for quite a while before finally taking hold of the envelope. He opened it with care, his gaze moving over the letter contained within. Alexander observed the change in Liam's expression, moving from uncertainty to confusion, and then to something else entirely, something that was difficult to interpret. At last, Liam placed the letter down and met Alexander's gaze. He wishes to see me. His voice held no clues, yet his hands quivered just a bit. Alexander maintained a steady tone. Do you want to meet him? Liam swallowed hard. I don't know, he admitted. But I think I need to. Alexander nodded, a heaviness settling in his chest. He had anticipated this moment, yet its arrival felt unexpectedly swift. Liam sat in the back seat of Alexander's car, gazing at the skyline of New York City as they neared the restaurant where he was to meet his father for the first time. His hands were tightly clasped in his lap, his mind swirling with questions he wasn't certain he wanted to confront. What if Mark Donovan wasn't the man he envisioned? What if he was distant, uncaring, or worse? What if he wished to erase Liam from his life entirely? The anxiety in his chest constricted as the car came to a stop in front of an elegant restaurant in Manhattan. Alexander gently rested a hand on his shoulder. You don't have to do this, he said in a soothing tone. Liam took a deep breath and nodded in response. I understand. Yet it's necessary. He exited the vehicle, his heart racing as he approached the entrance. The maitre d' promptly guided him to a secluded area of the restaurant, where at a table by the window sat Mark Donovan. The man exuded the same commanding presence as depicted in the newspapers, clad in a sharp suit, his hair impeccably styled, radiating an air of authority that distinguished him in any setting. However, as Liam drew closer, he observed something surprising. Mark's gaze wasn't one of indifference or cold calculation. It held something different altogether. Uncertainty, perhaps a hint of anxiety, lingered in the air. Liam, Mark remarked, rising as the boy approached the table. I'm pleased you made it. Liam took a seat across from him, nodding in acknowledgement. A brief silence enveloped them. Finally, Mark let out a breath, leaning in just a bit. I don't expect you to trust me, he admitted. I don't expect you to even like me. But I need you to understand, I was unaware of your existence. If I had, his voice faded, uncertainty hanging in the air. Liam scrutinized him, weighing the truth of his words. Why did my mom keep me away from you? He finally inquired. Mark's jaw clenched. She didn't trust me, he confessed, and I can't fault her for that. In my youth, I was driven, with my sights set on constructing an empire above all else. Yet, if she had shared her thoughts, if I had been aware, he shook his head, I would have approached things in a different manner. Liam found himself at a crossroads, uncertain of how to reply. A flicker of hope urged him to trust the words spoken, while another voice questioned the significance of it all. What do you seek from me? He inquired at last. Mark's expression softened. Nothing. I simply wish to understand you better. The dialogue unfolded gradually, marked by a careful pace as they exchanged thoughts on trivial matters. Liam's school, his interests, his life alongside Alexander. Mark paid close attention, interjecting with questions now and then, yet never pressing too forcefully. For the first time, Liam understood that this man, his father, shared the same uncertainty about their meeting. As the evening progressed, Mark paused before reaching into his pocket and retrieving an envelope. I don't want to overwhelm you, he said, sliding it across the table. However, I wish to present this to you. Liam picked it up, gazing at him with curiosity. "What is it?" "A letter," Mark replied. "I penned it on the night I discovered you. Contains all the words I longed to express but couldn't find the way." Liam paused for a moment before slipping the envelope into his pocket. He found himself uncertain about when, or if, he would ever delve into it. Yet, for the moment it was sufficient to acknowledge its existence. As they wrapped up their meal, Mark cleared his throat. "I understand that the past is unchangeable," he remarked. "However, if you ever feel like talking or wish to be included in my life, know that the door is always open." Liam gazed at him for an extended moment before eventually nodding. "All right, it wasn't a commitment. It wasn't a commitment, but it was a moment." When Liam stepped outside, Alexander was waiting for him by the car. He examined the boy's face intently. "How did it go?" Liam let out a breath, casting a glance back at the restaurant before turning his gaze to Alexander. "Better than I anticipated." Alexander grinned, resting a hand on his shoulder. "That's the only thing that counts." As they made their way home, Liam pulled the envelope from his pocket, his fingers tracing the edges. He hadn't opened it yet. For the first time in his life, he sensed that perhaps, just perhaps, he wasn't truly alone in this world after all.